Welcome to the Aquarius theory. What's good, family? So this is gonna be the Sun ingress into Leo video. This transit is taking place July 22nd, roughly around 3:14 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And so the Sun does represent our natural gifts and talents that we individually possess. The Sun can also symbolize higher intelligence, creativity, authority, but also the Sun is our focus. And so, with the sun ingressing into his domicile, Leo is the sign that represents creativity, self expression, confidence, creativity as well. And so, there is this need for us to, stand in our own light and to really express ourselves and, the beliefs that we have as well. Because when the sun ingresses into Leo, it will be making a conjunction with Jupiter. And Jupiter is the planet of knowledge, faith, belief, expansion, and abundance, right? And so typically the knowledge that Jupiter represents is the knowledge that we gain through our lived experiences because, life is the best teacher. Right. And so, with this ingress, there's several aspects that's being made. The sun is going to be in a conjunction with Jupiter as well as a lot of spirit. But the sun is going to be making an opposition to Pluto. It'll be making a trine to Neptune and Aries. It'll be making a square to Chiron and Taurus, while also making a sextile to Uranus and Gemini. And so this can symbolize a few things. But from the perspective of this ingress of the sun in conjunction with Jupiter, is that, most prominently is this opposition with Pluto at 4 degrees. And Pluto is a planet that tends to symbolize death, rebirth, transformation, fear, and power, right? And so we can feel this tension, right, as it pertains to us maybe expressing ourselves and having this sense of transformation that we undertake because we'll be receiving essentially some pushback, some limitations, some obstacles when it comes to us expressing ourselves to other people. You got to remember Aquarius is seven houses away from Leo, and typically the seventh house is representing our relationships, people that we deal with on a one-on-one level. And so maybe because of the things in which you're saying, the ways in which you're expressing yourself, you're receiving this pushback. And so we got to keep that in mind because Pluto, in and of itself, with it being in Aquarius, is currently being governed by this Saturn in Aries, which is 3 houses away. And so typically, when it comes to the third house, it can symbolize the mind, it can symbolize short distance journeys, but it's the things that we're learning. And so the thing is that this Pluto, you may be challenging ultimately the beliefs of other people, and some people won't want to accept what it is that you have to say or why it is that you're saying what you're saying. And so this is that opposition that we can definitely assume we're going to see and witness during the course of this, s- Leo season. But again, being mindful of what we're saying, that's going to be super important because, Jupiter in and of itself at 4 degrees and 55 minutes is highlighting this Virgo 12 part. So my advice is that whatever it is that you're going to be saying and expressing, especially publicly to other people, make sure that is based in some type of research, some type of understanding. Because if you're just saying whatever and you haven't really, you know, done the due diligence to, fine tune what you're saying, you can definitely expect some pushback from other people. All right. Now, with that being the case, the sun is also going to be making a trine to Neptune. Neptune represents illusions, delusions, things that we're not seeing clearly. This Neptune in Aries is going to be 9 houses away from Leo. And so, what this represents is that on a more philosophical lens, because the ninth house can deal with higher knowledge, philosophy, can deal with, media and the internet, publishing, right? When it comes to these more religious matters or this sense of belief, right? These more philosophical beliefs that we may have, there could be a sense of confusion, especially when it comes to whether maybe we should or should not express ourselves. All right. This Neptune that is at 4 degrees and 21 minutes retrograde is showing up in this Taurus 12th part. Now, Taurus is a sign that tends to symbolize, or energy that tends to symbolize, consistency. So, are we, saying this on a consistent basis? Are we truly rooted in a sense of foundation when it comes to whatever it is that we're expressing, or are we just kind of saying these things at the spur of the moment? The reason why this comes up is because this Neptune that is in Aries retrograde is going to be ruled, or is ruled currently, by this Mars in Gemini, 3 houses away. And what did we just say about things being 3 houses away? What have we learned? And so this Mars being in Gemini, Gemini is all about giving and receiving information. Mars is the planet of action. So, we're potentially going back and forth with ourselves about whether we should share this knowledge or not. And that's kind of how I'm, seeing this play out. Also, with this sun ingress into Leo, it is going to be making a square to Chiron. Chiron represents traumatic experiences and or wounds that, we need to heal. And with it being in Taurus, again, representing consistency, dependability, loyalty, and perseverance. If we have certain traumatic wounds or experiences, especially as it pertains to us being seen, or us being, viewed publicly by other people, we're gonna definitely want to heal these wounds in and of itself, right? The Chiron is being ruled by Venus, right? Because Venus rules over Taurus. And so when we're looking at it from this lens, this Chiron is being ruled by Venus that is 5 houses away. And what this is kind of symbolizing is that the things that bring us joy and pleasure, right? I would assume, we're wanting to be of service to other people. I'm assuming this is why we're wanting to say what we say, because again, we're wanting people to have a greater understanding of things that, we might have come across, things that we've come to understand at some point in our lives. But at the same time, we can't be fearful of judgment from other people, which is really what this Venus is highlighting at 14 degrees and 19 minutes, showing up in this Aquarius 12th part. All right. Aquarius does symbolize other people, but it also represents intelligence, authenticity, and collectivism. And so it's important for you to be authentically you and understand the intention of why you're saying what it is that you're saying. Because if you're doing it simply for clout, simply for recognition, because you want to be controversial, or whatever the case may be, that may get called out by other people in some form or fashion. Now, the last aspect that the sun is going to be making is the sextile to Uranus. Uranus is a planet that represents unexpected events that can take place, sudden changes. It is a planet that kind of symbolizes liberation and freedom as well. And with it being, 11 houses away from the sun, the 11th house tends to represent our goals, dreams, and aspirations. It also tends to symbolize, other people, people we know, people we don't know, right? Friends, community, associates, right? And so having this Uranus in Gemini, Gemini is all about giving and receiving information. And so the sun making a sextile to this Uranus is, part of the reason why I'm assuming we are saying what we're saying is because not only are we trying to liberate ourselves, but we're wanting other people to feel a sense of liberation as well. And so this is going to come through, how we're communicating, how we're delivering the information, what is the message. And that's something I often have to highlight to people, especially Leo and Sag type placements, is that, a lot of the times it's not what you say that is the issue, is how you're saying it. Your delivery is very important as it pertains to the message that you're trying to, give to other people. And so during this Leo season, I think it's going to be really important for you to just understand that how you are delivering your information, what are you trying to get across to other people, you need to be supportive in that. Right, that hey, it may take a little time. Hey, guess what? This may be uncomfortable to address, but how I deliver the information and the reasoning behind me delivering this information is ultimately what I'm trying to get across. And I think as long as you keep all of those aspects in mind, this will be a very smooth Leo season for you. All right, so this is going to be Leo season for all 12 zodiac signs. This can apply to your sun or your rising. I advise you listen to both just so you have, different perspectives as it pertains to what you may be dealing with personally this Leo season. Now, for Leos, much of what we talked about, initially with this Leo season is going to apply to you. Now, the biggest thing that I would highlight for Leos is simply the fact that when the sun ingresses into Leo, it is making that conjunction to Jupiter, and that Jupiter being in the first house is going to cause you to feel more invigorated, more jovial, right? There is a greater need or belief that we need to express ourselves. But the one thing I will caution to Leo suns or risings is the fact that Jupiter is all about expansion. And a lot of the times with Jupiter, there is a tendency for us to do too much, right? So we might need to scale it back. And Jupiter being at 4 degrees and 55 minutes of the sun ingressing into Leo speaks to that, right? This belief is showing up in the Virgo 12th part. And Virgo is the energy of refinement, of improvement, changing what it is that we're seeing. And it is important for us to understand that the belief that we have in ourselves, maybe as it pertains to our confidence or, how we're expressing our creativity in some form or fashion, there is a need or a belief that we need to do things better. Right now, because of that opposition of Pluto in Aquarius, 7 houses away, you may feel this need for you to refine what it is that you're saying from other people. Very much so. The 7th house deals with relationships, and this is where you may feel pushback from others, right? Whether it's romantic relationships, platonic relationships, friends, family, right? In some form or fashion, from other people that you deal with on a more personal level, you can feel this sense of tension and maybe the need for you to refine how you're expressing yourself or what it is that you're saying, because again, it could be potentially too much. Now, one thing I will highlight for Leos is that, when it comes to the self expression aspect, it's typically not what you're saying, but it's more so how you're saying it, right? What is the delivery? What is your tone? How are you expressing the message that you're trying to give to other people? Because that's where that confusion is going to come into play. You may not feel like there's anything that you need to do differently than what you've been doing, right? But not taking the opportunity to refine your communication or self-expression is what's going to give you this sense of limitation, especially when it comes to your relationships with other people. And because of the Chiron being in Taurus, right? Chiron represents wounds. Taurus has ability or tendency to represent stubbornness, right? It's consistency and a bunch of other things as well. But with it being in your 10th house, our public image, our reputation, we don't want to be known as stubborn, right? Not unless, that's your prerogative. But, if that's not the case, then we are going to want to change. And that's really what the Uranus in the 11th house of Gemini is speaking to, right? Uranus is a planet of liberation and freedom, but it's sudden changes, right? And the fact that this Uranus in Gemini is being ruled by the Mercury and Cancer in your 12th house, 12th house is symbolizing you from a more internal level, whether this is spiritually, psychologically, or emotionally. It's important for you not to get in your own way of what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Virgos. All right. So this Leo season, the sun is going to be in your 12th house. It's going to be making a conjunction with Jupiter. The opposition of Pluto is going to be happening in your 6th house of the things that we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And so what this can be symbolizing is again, this internal need for us to maybe have a greater sense of confidence in ourselves, but to also remember that there are certain beliefs that we probably need to let go of that's affecting us on a more consistent day-to-day basis, right? You have Neptune, in your 8th house of other people, and so, because of these beliefs that you have, but about yourself, because remember, as I always highlight, the 12th house is you from a more spiritual, psychological, and emotional level. And so, there are some internal things that we probably need to get situated, and because of these beliefs, it is affecting how we are operating or any sense of limitation we may feel when it comes to us dealing with other people, right? The 8th house is shared resources, is debts, taxes, investments, right? And that Neptune being here, we may not know why we're having limitations in these relationships with people that we want to deal with on a consistent basis. The Chiron also being in your 9th house of philosophy, mindset, in and of itself is speaking to this. There are probably wounds that we've sustained in the past, right? That we do need to heal from. And if we haven't done so, maybe this is the belief in and of itself that is causing us to have so much friction and or tension with other people. Now, the Uranus being in your 10th house of public image and reputation, there are changes in terms of how we want other people to see us. And so, if we want these changes to really occur, this is where the Mercury in Cancer comes into play, and this Mercury retrograde that we've been dealing with for about a month, right? Mercury for Virgos is their chart ruler. And so Mercury retrograde in Cancer in our 11th house of goals, dreams, and aspirations, we need to really reflect and review, how are we looking at community? What is the role that we are playing in the lives of other people? Because this belief that you may have about yourself and that maybe nobody cares about you or whatever the case may be, it's important for us to really sit and think on this, because if we want things to be different, then we literally have to do different. Right, that's kind of been the theme that's been showing up lately for a lot of people, and that's what I will highlight for you. Also, just keep in mind Venus is in the first house, so again, we need to give ourselves some love, and this, Leo season can be a great start in that direction. Libras. So this Leo season is going to be putting an emphasis on our 11th house. Again, our goals, dreams, and aspirations, but it can also be dealing with friends and associates as well. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that the ruler of Libra is Venus, and Venus is in Virgo. So, we're doing some internal reflection on whether these people that we're dealing with on a consistent basis are the people for us. And maybe these beliefs that we once held are changing. And that's what we're dealing with. Remember, this Sun Jupiter opposition to Pluto is going to be taking place in our fifth house of the things that bring us joy and pleasure. And maybe we had a certain belief that, these people will be around forever. And maybe we're starting to notice that things are changing in that regard. Now, the Neptune being in your seventh house relationships kind of brings that into mind, because again, Neptune is a planet of confusion. The seventh house is relationships, and because it's making a trine to the Sun and Jupiter, this is what we're speaking about. Now, Chiron being in the eighth house, there are traumatic wounds and experiences that we have had, especially as it pertains to maybe some instability dealing with, people and shared resources and wanting people to be more consistent and dependable. But again, these are things that we do need to heal in order for us to, put ourselves in the best position possible. And so, this Uranus being in our ninth house of philosophy, ultimately highlighting our mindset, it could be some unexpected changes that you can potentially see and or expect from other people. This is going to be important because again, Uranus is liberation, it is freedom. And so we don't want to, stand in our own way of change. Remember, this Uranus is being ruled by Mercury. Mercury's in the 10th house of public image. So if we want people to see us in a different light, then we do need to make some changes for sure. Scorpios. So this Leo season is putting the emphasis on our 10th house of public image, reputation, authority. And so, as it pertains to what it is that we're trying to do, especially since the ruler of Scorpio is Mars and Mars is in our eighth house of other people, I would assume we are trying to change our public image in the eyes of other people. Now, the thing is that because of this Sun Jupiter conjunction making this opposition to Pluto in our fourth house of home and family, this can cause tension with family, right? Maybe these certain beliefs that we've upheld from our childhood, maybe this is what's causing us to feel maybe limited and or restricted to a certain sense. And because of this Jupiter Sun making the trine to Neptune in our sixth house of the things that we're doing on a day-to-day basis, maybe this new profession, this new light that we're trying to present ourselves in, maybe there's a sense of confusion to, things or people that we may deal with on a more day-to-day basis. Now, Chiron is making a square to the sun. Chiron is in our seventh house of relationships, right? People might have this image of who you are, and this is who you always been, things of this nature. But again, because of the Uranus, we are trying to change. And with that being in mind, as I've highlighted for the other signs, Mercury is in our ninth house of philosophy, right? Our mindset. And this is what the Mercury retrograde in Cancer has been about. We are wanting things to be different, and in order for things to be different, we have to change our mindset, especially as it pertains to how we see ourselves and the beliefs about who we are. Because again, people are going to look at you in a certain light, but just because people have their own opinions or perspectives of who you are, that doesn't define you personally. What are your own personal beliefs, and what is it that you're trying to accomplish publicly? Sagittarius. So this Leo season is putting an emphasis on our ninth house of long distance journeys, higher education, our mindset, right? Higher knowledge in and of itself. And so, because our mindset in Leo deals with confidence, it deals with creativity, I would assume we're trying to expand or, explore the different ways in which we can better ourselves. And that's really what Jupiter, being your chart ruler, is symbolizing, showing up in this Virgo 12th part, right? We're trying to put ourselves in a better situation. And in order for us to do so, we do have to, maybe change certain beliefs that we had about ourselves that we've probably been, holding on to for quite some time. The third house and this Pluto being in the third house itself deals with our mindset or the things that we're here to learn. It can also deal with our immediate environment and the people within it. And so maybe this new sense of confidence or maybe the need to expand yourself mentally is challenging these old beliefs that we had, right? That we've probably held on to for quite some time. The thing is that Neptune is in your fifth house. The fifth house represents the things that bring us joy and pleasure, hobbies, children as well. And maybe through this, sense of expansion, we're not necessarily sure how we're going to be able to continue certain relationships because again you're trying to change, so ultimately the people and how you operate within relationships will change as well. We can see that with the fact that the ruler of Aries is Mars is in your seventh house of relationships, so this can very much be the case. The Chiron square, right, in Taurus is really speaking to this aspect because Chiron and Taurus in your sixth house, so the things that we're doing on a day-to-day basis is that we can be very set in our ways, right? Funny that Sag um can be pretty consistent with what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, but this is what it is that is showing up as. And so we are wanting to heal these wounds that we sustained because again it is affecting maybe the mindset that you have about yourself. And that's really where the liberation Uranus is coming into play, because there is a need for us to free ourselves from certain perspectives, certain ways of operating. And this is why I would assume that need to let go of or to actually um end certain beliefs that we have are so important for you at this time. Remember, this Mercury retrograde was taking place in your eighth house of shared resources, relationships that you have with other people and maybe the things that they have. And so I could assume that over the course of this Mercury retrograde, you've been reflecting on certain relationships that you have with other people. And so, how you navigate this space is really important, but having the confidence to be yourself and to speak your truth, right, in the right fashion will be really helpful this Leo season. Capricorn. So this Leo season is putting an emphasis on our eighth house, shared resources, debts, taxes, investments, business. And the ruler of Capricorn is Saturn. Saturn is currently in your fourth house of home and family, childhood experiences as well, ancestral roots. And so, this Leo season putting an emphasis on our eighth house of shared resources is really important because again, the sun is making a conjunction to Jupiter. Jupiter is a planet of expansion, and maybe we're wanting to expand, our resources that we have with other people. The thing is that, this Jupiter is, making an opposition to Pluto, so is the sun. And so Pluto being in your second house, Pluto is a planet of fear and it's in the second house of resources. And maybe there's a certain belief that, hey, if I, combine my resources with this other person, that, things aren't going to go according to plan. And so that may keep you from actually making the changes that need to be made. The thing is that, this Sun Jupiter conjunction making a trine to Neptune in the fourth house of home and family. This is where, again, there's a sense of confusion, right? If we're wanting stability, then there are some things that we probably need to do. And that's ultimately where we do have to address this Chiron in the fifth house, right? The things that bring you joy and pleasure. Now, I would assume that there are certain wounds that we do need to heal. And this can pertain to maybe the lack of stability that you felt like you may have based off of past experiences, right? That maybe if you join your finances or your resources with somebody else's, that, things aren't going to work out in your favor in the end. But ultimately, we need to heal this wound. And this is where the Uranus coming into the sixth house of the things that we're doing on a day to day basis really allows you to liberate yourself. Because again, Uranus is sudden changes. It is freedom, right? But it's innovation. And because it's in the sixth house of the things that we're doing on a day to day basis, we understand that there are some things that we have to do differently. Remember, this Uranus in Gemini is being ruled by the Mercury retrograde that's been happening in your seventh house of relationships. So I'm assuming that during the course of this Mercury retrograde, you've already been kind of thinking about what needs to be done differently in your relationships with other people. But again, this is more so based off of the mindset that you have. And in order for you to build a solid foundation with somebody else, you're going to have to change certain beliefs that you have about combining what you have and what the other person has as well. Aquarius. So this Leo season is putting an emphasis on our seventh house relationships, whether it's romantic, platonic, or business related, contracts and agreements. And the Sun and Jupiter is making an opposition to Pluto in our first house of self. And so for a lot of us Aquariuses, we are, going through a more transformative period. Pluto is going to be in Aquarius till 2044. And so this is a longer term transit that we're understanding with Pluto being in the first. But again, this is causing us to have to challenge certain beliefs that we've been holding on to, especially as it pertains to other people. Now, because the Sun and Jupiter is making a trine to Neptune, in our third house of lessons that we're here to learn, our immediate environment, there's a sense of confusion that we have, especially about the people that I'm sure we have closest to us. But again, these beliefs do need to be changed in some form or fashion because again, we're understanding more about ourselves. And so maybe the beliefs that we once had are no longer, fitting the billing. And this is where we do have to address the Chiron and Taurus, right? And Chiron making a square to the Sun of Jupiter. Chiron is traumatic experiences and it's in our fourth house of foundation, right? So the foundation in terms of how we're operating with other people may be, the sense of that confusion because again we can have this outlook to where it's just like, hey, I don't need nobody else, all I need is myself. But the thing is, even though we are individual, we do operate within a collective. So we do need relationships. All right. And this is where we do need to liberate ourselves, right? How are we thinking about things? Because again, the Uranus and Gemini is all about things that we understand, things that we're learning. And it's in the fifth house of the things that bring us joy and pleasure. And so while we're continuing to try to expand our understanding, our mindset in and of itself, we do have to make certain changes, especially as it pertains to our beliefs about other people. And this is what I'm assuming the Mercury retrograde in our sixth house of the things that bring us joy and pleasure. Or the sixth house of the things that we do on a day-to-day basis where that comes into play because again, Mercury's been in Cancer is all about support and feeling nurtured. And so if we haven't felt nurtured and support in certain relationships, it may not be, a write-off for all people, but it may be a write-off for some people. And that's an important distinction that we do have to make this Leo season. Pisces. So this Leo season is putting an emphasis on our sixth house, so the things that we're doing on a more day-to-day basis, health, sickness, service to others. And so it's important that with the sun being in conjunction with Jupiter, making this opposition to Pluto in our 12th house of the internal, that we are changing certain beliefs that we have. The thing is that I often highlight to Pisces is that, it's very easy for Pisces to sacrifice themselves for others. And so this is where this Leo season can really challenge those beliefs that we have about ourselves and what we're here to do on a day-to-day basis. Now, with the sun being in Leo, it's very important for you to express yourself. But again, because it's making that opposition to Pluto, Pluto representing fear and transformation, there are some internal changes that we need to make and maybe challenge certain beliefs that we have about ourselves and how we, again, are here to operate. The sun and Jupiter is making a trine to Neptune in our second house of value. And so, this can cause some confusion because if you're not putting them, sense of value and importance on yourself, it may be harder for other people to see this sense of value in you as well. And this is something that Pisces often deal with, right? People taking advantage of their kindness and mistaking it for weakness. And this is where we do want to heal certain wounds that we have, especially with Chiron being in your third house of, the things that we've learned and people within our immediate environment. Chiron is traumatic experiences that we do need to heal, and Taurus deals with consistency and stubbornness at times. And so we don't want to be stubborn in this regard as it pertains to making changes to this personal belief about who we are and how we're here to operate. Because again, Uranus being in Gemini, making a sextile to the Sun and Jupiter, is putting the emphasis on this need for us to liberate ourselves. And in order for us to do so, we do have to make a change in our mindset and how we're looking at certain situations and circumstances that we're, placing ourselves in. And I'm assuming that's what the Mercury retrograde in your fifth house is bringing up, because again, Mercury is a planet of communication, is in the fifth house of the things that bring us joy and pleasure, children, hobbies, fortune. And so it's important for us to really think about, what are the things that make me happy, right? While I'm always trying to do other things for everybody else, what about me? Right. And that may be the ultimate belief and the change of belief that has to take place this Leo season for you. Aries. So we do have this Leo season putting an emphasis on our fifth house of the things that bring us joy and pleasure. And the sun is in a conjunction with Jupiter. Remember, Jupiter is all about expansion. And so when it comes to, having a good time and indulging in our pleasures, we may be doing this too much. And this is where we see the sun, Jupiter making this opposition to Pluto come into play. Remember, the 11th house does represent our goals, dreams, and aspirations. And it can also deal with other people, friends, and associates as well, but I'm assuming this is more so pertaining to your personal goals. And so, how are your overindulgence in certain pleasures standing in the way of what it is that you're ultimately trying to accomplish? Remember, the Sun and Jupiter is making a trine to Neptune. Neptune is in your first house of self, and Neptune is the confusion that you may have as it pertains to why you may not be able to achieve these certain goals, dreams, and aspirations. And this is where we have to revisit, how are we indulging or overindulging potentially in the things that make us happy. There is Chiron here in the second house as well. Chiron and Taurus making a square to this Sun and Jupiter in Leo. And so what this is kind of referencing is that maybe we're overvaluing, this sense of joy and pleasure, or the things that we're doing that's ultimately stopping us from where we're trying to go. And this is where the Uranus in the third house comes into play. We got to remember that as an Aries, your ruler is Mars, and Mars is in Gemini as well. And so I would assume that we've been learning that there are certain changes that we need to make, and maybe, the sense of value that we're placing on certain things that we do is what's standing in the way of where we're actually trying to go. You remember, Uranus is liberation, is freedom. And so how we're looking at certain situations and circumstances matter. This is what the Mercury retrograde in Cancer in our fourth house has been speaking about. Remember, Mercury is a planet of communication. It is conscious thinking, and it's in our fourth house of family, ancestral roots, foundation. And so your mindset is the foundation for how you operate and do anything. And so it's important for us to reflect on these matters, because again, we can be overindulging in things that are stopping us from actually achieving our goals. Taurus. So this Leo season is putting an emphasis on our fourth house of home and family, childhood experiences, foundation. And so it's important for us to have an understanding of certain beliefs that we have as it pertains to the home environment and family in and of itself. We got to remember that the ruler of Taurus is Venus. Venus is currently in your fifth house of the things that bring you joy and pleasure. And so we've been trying to refine what it is that we do in terms of, letting loose or having fun, and maybe we've been overindulging in some form or fashion, and maybe that's affecting, how the home environment has been going. And so, with the sun making the opposition to Pluto, Pluto being in your 10,000 public image, we don't want to give, family more specifically, we don't want them to see us in a negative light. And so this is where again we have the sun Jupiter making that, trine to Neptune in the 12th house. We have a sense of confusion because maybe, family members, maybe people we care about, have been expressing certain things to us, and we're not understanding why they feel the way that they feel. And this is, also hitting that Chiron in the first house of self as well. The things that make you happy, while yes, that is important, if family is super important to you, then we have to address, their concerns as well. And this is where this Uranus in the second house really comes into play, because Uranus is a planet of liberation and freedom. And so this Uranus is making a sextile to the sun and Jupiter in that fourth house. And so having this open dialogue is really important. And that's what this Mercury retrograde happening in Cancer in your third house has been about. Because again, Mercury is the planet of communication and is ruling over the Uranus and Mars in your second house of money and value. And so communicating, expressing your feelings and emotions with other people is super important at this time, because again, there are certain beliefs that we have that we've probably been holding on to for a long time that we probably need to change. Geminis. So this Leo season is putting an emphasis on our third house. Third house is our immediate environment, lessons that we're here to learn. And so there are things that we do need to learn and maybe, change as it pertains to certain beliefs that we have about ourselves, especially as it pertains to us expressing ourselves um publicly to other people in some form or fashion. Remember, the ruler of Gemini is Mercury. Mercury has been in our second house for about 2 months, and Mercury's been retrograde. And so we've been, kind of reflecting on the things that we value, especially when it comes to how we are communicating ourselves with other people. Now, the thing is that this Sun and Jupiter is making an opposition to Pluto in our ninth house of philosophy, our overall mindset. And so there is a need for us to change and challenge certain beliefs that we have, especially when it comes to us expressing ourselves. And so, this Jupiter and the Sun is also making a trine to Neptune. Neptune is in our 11th house of our goals, dreams, and aspirations, friends, and associates. And so I could assume that this is dealing with maybe a sense of confusion about how we're communicating with other people in some form or fashion, especially on a more consistent basis. And so there is this Chiron in our 12th house. Chiron represents traumatic experiences and or wounds that we do need to heal. And because it's in the 12th house of the internal self, right? You from a more spiritual, psychological, or emotional level, it's important that we address these wounds that we have, because these wounds may ultimately influence why we're not communicating or expressing ourselves as consistently as we should. We do have Uranus also in the first house. Uranus is a planet of liberation, sudden changes, freedom. And so we can expect during this Uranus transit that's going to be in our first house for the next 7 years to really influence how we're operating. And, how we are expressing ourselves is a big part of that. Gemini is all about giving and receiving information. And so, again, just revisiting this Mercury retrograde on our second house, are we placing value on our communication? Or are we, fine with maybe limiting ourselves with how much we're expressing to others? Cancers. So we do have this Leo season putting an emphasis on our second house of finances and resources, the things that sustain us. And, with Jupiter also being in this second house, things are expanding as it pertains to the beliefs that we have about these values. The thing is that the Sun in Jupiter is making an opposition to Pluto. Pluto is a planet of fear, power, death, and rebirth, and it's in the eighth house of other people's resources. And so what this can symbolize is the fact that, maybe certain things that you value, certain beliefs that you have, you're coming to understand that other people don't value these beliefs the same. And this is where the sense of confusion can come into play. Remember, Neptune represents confusion, and it's in our 10th house of our public image. And so how is this image, this, reputation that you have, how is this changing based off of the understanding that you have that the things that you value are not valued by other people? And so this is where this Chiron making a square to the Sun and Jupiter can really cause some tension as well, because again, Chiron is traumatic experiences or wounds that we need to heal, and it's in Taurus in our 11th house of our goals, dreams, and aspirations, friends, and associates. And so there are certain wounds when it comes to, us dealing with other people that we do need to heal. I do want to keep in mind that Cancer is ruled by the moon, and the moon is in Scorpio in the 5th house, right, of the things that bring us joy and pleasure as it pertains to the time of this, beginning of this Leo season. And so, with that being in mind, we have this Uranus and Mars also happening in our 12th house. Uranus is a planet of liberation, freedom, and there are certain things that we do need to change internally. Remember, Gemini is dealing with giving and receiving information, so this is more so speaking about a mindset, and we can understand that that is actually what's going on because this Uranus and Mars is being ruled by Mercury in our first house retrograde. And so the Mercury retrograde in the first house has just bringing a lot of things to the forefront of your mind as it pertains to not just you, but also how you are dealing with other people. And maybe this belief about, the things that you value being opposed by other people is just, reminding you of the importance of self and, really bringing you into a sense of clarity about your direction moving forward. Hopefully, the information I was able to provide you, family, assists you along your journey during this Leo season. But again, if you're wanting more specific understanding as it pertains to you individually, feel free to tap in with a reading with me. You can check out my website through the link in my bio, or you can catch me on TikTok live Sunday through Friday, typically around 10:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. I appreciate y'all, and I hope y'all have a great rest of your day. Y'all be safe. Peace.